we're in Canada because...
A boot! Not a boot! Sorry.
Hey, welcome back to Trail Trash Garage with Jeff. This video has been a long time coming. I tried to make it several times this spring or fall, sorry, when I got the DRZ400. I just wanted to get an initial thoughts video out there. I know there's lots of videos out there about the DRZ400, but I just kind of wanted to give our viewers my take on it. Doing a lot of research, I really flip-flop back and forth between the DRZ and the DR650. For various reasons, I was sticking to those two. Now, Colin got the KLX300, and that kind of threw some more into the mix, but you can't, at the time you couldn't really buy a used KLX300 or a CRF300L, and I didn't really have the money to go out and buy a brand new one. So I ended up going with a used DRZ. And I'll talk about new versus used in a little bit here, but a couple of videos popped up lately that really made me dig up. I'm going to dig up some ride footage, and you should see that throughout this video. It's not just going to be a talking head. The audio was trash. It was all mic tests when I got this new Osmo Action from DJI. And the audio is trash on these videos, but I was trying to do a vlog talking about my impressions of the DRZ. So I decided to, instead of just scrapping that video footage, to kind of overlay it here and use this and a talk over or a voiceover and kind of get my initial thoughts out about this. And why is it relevant now? Two reasons. Okay, one, I just recently saw two videos posted up. One by, I think it's Adventure Daily. He has a cold brew and talks about motorcycle matters. Anyway, he mentioned something about DRZ. Is the DRZ relevant in 2021? Molson Canadian, a classic Canadian lager, by the way. And then Dork on the Road did a response video to it, you know, the DRZ in 2022. Just recently, I just watched it. So I said, you know what, that really, I got some thoughts on those videos. So I wanted to weigh in on it and incorporate into this some of my initial thoughts on the DRZ. You know, why are we still talking about the DRZ? It was out in, you know, in 2000. And really we're talking about it because Suzuki hasn't done anything with it. And although the other manufacturers have all hit around the bullseye, they've never hit the bullseye. And as good as the KLX is, and you guys can go watch my video on that on Trail Trash EDV. That's one of our more popular videos. You can, I like the bike. It's a good bike, and I'm not going back through all the things that I went through in that video. But I just wanted to, that's basically my frame of reference for comparing a modern bike to the DRZ, and so I'm going to make that comparison. Now I've ridden a CRF300L, and I have not ridden a CRF300L as of yet. So I'm trying not to say too much about that bike, but from all intents and purposes, the reviews I've read comparing the two bikes, other than the suspensions, there's quite a bit similar on those two bikes. They definitely fill the same niche. So that's basically going to be the main comparison. So, and that's why we're still talking about the DRZ, because nobody's quite hit the nail on the head. The European manufacturers don't have the longevity, the reputation for maintenance-free, bulletproof engine, and cost that the DRZ has. The other Japanese manufacturers are still running 300s, and we're going to talk about that. Down here on my list. So I made a little list because I want to keep all these things straight. So the big elephant in the room, two big elephants in the room with the DRZ whenever we talk about it, is carb and 5-speed transmission. So let's address the carb first. There's a lot of mess out around carbs and EFI, and I just want to get a couple things out here. And if I'm wrong, and if you feel I'm wrong, and you've got proof that I'm wrong, please put it in the comments. Don't just say I'm wrong. Show me the science, because this is my research and 20 plus years experience working on motorcycles, and so I just want to get this out of the way. What's good about the carb? Well, jets are easily changed. In FI, that's not the case. So some models you can use a fuel tuner, like a power commander or whatever that lays over top of the fuel map. And in other models such as the Bonneville, I was able to remap the fuel map for the exhaust, or the mods, the intake and the exhaust mods that I was able to do. Okay, but here's the thing with that. FI in your, and this works into the elevation issue, right? Like, okay, well, your carb's going to run lean at really high elevations. And yes, there may be some situations where that's the case, where you're going to be so high. Like I live at sea level almost here in Nova Scotia, and if I was to go to the very tip of some high trails in the Rockies, I may start to see some issues with, you know, my carburetor. More modern carburetors aren't affected as much by that. I mean, especially CV carburetors, they regulate that quite a bit more because of the way they slide. But that brings in some other issues that I'll talk about in a minute. The benefits with the CV carb, there are some trade-offs, depending on how you look at that. But anyway, I'll get back to that in a second. But with an FI, most of the FI you find on motorcycles these days. Now, there's some new motorcycles coming out all the time that maybe the FI is a little more intelligent, like maybe your upper models, Goldwings, KTMs, BMWs maybe. But for the most part, even on my Triumph, it had O2 sensors, but it was a closed system. Those O2 sensors really didn't provide feedback to the computer to adjust the fuel map. The fuel map is a fuel map. At this throttle opening, it gets this much fuel. This throttle opening gets this much fuel. And most of your motorcycle FI systems, that's exactly what it is. It's not a dynamic system where your vehicle is taking, or your bike is taking input from those sensors and then adjusting the fuel map depending on the conditions. So they're not as adaptive as you think they are. There's very, very little adaptation going on there. With the Bonneville, there's a, I don't want to say there isn't any, because there's a little bit. There's an adaptive, just for an example, and I don't want to get too far into the willy wags with this, but there was a training session that you could do. Once you mapped a new fuel map, there were some slight adjustments that would happen in the first 20 minutes. You're supposed to run the bike for 20 minutes, and the fuel was the ECU was supposed to adapt or whatever. But it doesn't do that on an ongoing basis. If you change elevation and you go up, you know, into Colorado or something, it's not going to really change it. You're going to have to do that adaptive procedure again, is what from my understanding from Triumph Twin Power and the forums and whatnot. You know, people who know even more than I do, which isn't hard. It's not going to dynamically change, you know. So people say that, oh well, FI is better. You know what? It really isn't. I question that. And if you've got some proof that motorcycles are come with completely adaptive FI systems that take all that into account on an ongoing real-time basis, then please let me know. Show me the models. I'd love to hear about it. But as far as I'm concerned, and most of the models that I've come in contact with so far, it's a set fuel map, and that's what it is. And you can change the fuel map if you're lucky that your model supports that. If not, you know, your model is what it is, right? You know, until the KLX, somebody comes out with some way of either a fuel tuner or some way to program the fuel map over that. Doing intake and exhaust mods on the KLX are going to be difficult. Maybe somebody's already working on that. I don't know, but I just want to get that out of the way, that just because you say, oh, the bike's got FI, doesn't necessarily mean that it's adaptive AI and that it's going to adjust for elevation and air density and all those sorts of things. They don't really, you know, in general. Like I said, there's some fancy models like a Goldwing or, you know, a K1600 GLT or whatever the BMW Big Tour is. So yeah, that's a myth. So most of the people talking on the internet, not everybody, but most of the people talking on the internet about this stuff don't know their ass from hole in the ground. So at least with a carb, you can change jets. So if you happen to move, then at least, and you move from sea level to Colorado, you can change the jets out if you find the bike's not running properly. With FI, it really depends on whether there's aftermarket support, some really intelligent people that are writing fuel maps, or that whether the company has given you an ECU where you can plug in an OBD2 connector in a laptop and make changes. This is not always the case with FI, so you're really at the mercy of the manufacturer for those. So to me, that's a downside. I don't mind pulling a choke, you know, to warm the bike up. you know, in order to have that. No, I'm not going to buy a bike because it's not because it doesn't have a carbon as FI. Like the Van, for example, is FI, but that bike is not popular enough. Nobody's making fuel maps or tuners or anything like that for the Van. So I'm very leery of, like, I hate that big old exhaust pipe that comes off of it, for example. But I'm really scared to change it. Not scared, but I'm leery of changing it because I know I won't be able to adjust the FI on that bike. Just nobody makes anything for that. So you're kind of stuck. The next thing is I don't understand why people say, well, if you keep it clean or maintenance. Like, I don't understand that with carbs. Like, it's not going to foul on you immediately. Like an FI fuel injector still has fuel residue in those injectors, and if you run ethanol fuel and you leave it in there and you don't treat the fuel, it could gum up and clog an injector. Same thing with the gas tank. You leave your gas tank over winter with only a quart of fuel in it. Moisture condenses, starts rusting the tank. You get rust particles down into your fuel injector. Good luck. Good luck with that. At least the carb, I can take it out and I can clean it. With the fuel injector, you may be looking at replacing the fuel injector, and that's going to be costly if you can find the replacement. Like, it's so. Store your. It doesn't matter if it's got FI or a carb. Store your bike. Treat the fuel. Fill up the tank if it's a metal tank. You know, drain the carb. Whatever you're going to do, right? You need the fuel out of those things. You know, or treated fuel. I've never really had a problem treating the fuel, and the fuel going bad in 1 year, so that you start getting that cruddy varnish, you know, in the carb. And the thing is right now we're at the age where FI is still new enough where you're not digging a bike out of the barn with FI that's been sitting there for 20 years, and then you're trying to get a will it run video with FI. I mean, even most of your vehicle will it run videos are all running points and carburetors and stuff, and the ones that are running electronic ignitions are still running carbs. Like, let's just see what happens in a few years when people start pulling these bikes out, if we can even do that with emission standards where they go. But that's another topic for another day. But let's just see where that happens when you're trying to pull a bike out of a barn, right? With your FI. At least with carbs, you can still clean it if you need to, but there really isn't any danger in that. If you don't leave your bike sitting for 2 or 3 years, where the fuel has turned to varnish and it's gummed up your carburetor, there's really no need to ever take that carb out and do anything with it. Just leave it alone. It's going to run just like FI every year if you treat the bike properly. And if you don't treat the bike properly, you can always pull the carb and clean it. With FI, it might be a little more resistant to that stuff. Like, maybe there's not a fuel bowl that the fuel's sitting there, maybe. It's hard to say depending on the design, but if that fuel injector's clogged, I don't know. I'd Google that stuff. I don't know how many. I haven't seen too many YouTube videos of guys that are cleaning fuel injectors. And tracking one down for an older BMW is, I have had experience doing that, and that's a nightmare. So, yeah, we'll see how FI stands up. So that takes elevation and cleaning and all that. The other thing is, back to CV versus direct throttle slide carburetors. And when I say that, I mean like your electron carbs or your pumper carbs. Versus the CV carbs. The one thing FI has over carburetor is the fact that fuel efficiency. So it's spraying just the right amount of fuel into the stream. So it's very consistent as long as the fuel injector is working properly. Although a carburetor is still very consistent too. The jets are the same size; they don't vary. Just the vacuum does. But they're a little more fuel efficient that way. So your gas mileage is a little better, or it can be a little better. Sometimes it's not, but it can be. Usually, typically, because the fuel is metered very specifically. With carbs, you do have a little variance where you're going from the pilot jet system to the needle jet, and then the jet to the main jet on wide open throttle. So, you know, FI is that way, and it's the way of the future. I'm not. Again, I just want to stress this very much. I'm not saying carbs are better than FI. I'm just saying that carbs get a lot of people are misrepresenting FI and carbs on the internet, and I'm trying to straighten that out. Neither one's a deal breaker for me. So, throttle response is what I was going to talk about, though. So your CV carbs are a little bit more fuel efficient than your direct pull carbs, like your round slides and your flat sides. Not quite as efficient as FI, but people complain about the CV carbs because the throttle response is lacking there, and it is true. There's a bit of a hesitation there before the air can get in and push that slide up to get the vacuum going, and there is a delay. But for a new rider, that's not a bad thing. That's really not a bad thing, especially, you know, with a higher horsepower engine. And when I say higher horsepower, I mean, you know, something like 40 horse or something like that for a new beginner, right? Because let's face it, the Van's like 18 horsepower. That's perfect for a beginner to learn on. And what do you get with the FI? Well, you get snatchy throttles, right? And so you get these people that are walking out and buying an FC07 or an FC09 with a snatchy throttle. Now, it took them a few years. Apparently, the newer ones, I haven't test rode in a few years. The newer ones are better. Like, they're starting to get some of the kinks worked out of these fuel tuners and the multi ride modes and stuff like that. But I'm still seeing reviews of brand new 2021 and 2022 bikes with snatchy throttles, and that's down to throttle position sensors and FI. And with a carb, you just don't have that. And although you sacrifice some fuel economy with a flat side or round slide carb, you do get that crispness off the throttle, especially if you've got a pumper carb. Like, you really get that crispness that you would get with FI without the snatchy. So, yeah, again, carbs aren't better than FI. I'm not making that claim. But I'm just saying that both have been misrepresented very grossly on the internet. So, the other elephant in the room with the DRZ is the 5th gear versus 6th gear on other bikes. And honestly, I don't know how many times I've gotten in an argument with people on forums over this. Like, the number of gears, it does not matter. I mean, why is everybody stuck up on 6 gears? Like, do you really want to shift one more gear? Do you really want to forget that which gear you're in? Like, that's just more work. It's all about gear ratios. That's really what we're talking about. And a 5th gear bike can be just as effective as a 6th gear bike if the gear ratios are done properly. Now, the big criticism with road riding on the DRZ is the close gear ratios, and that is true, right? They're very close. I believe that's intentional, probably because I think the E model was the first model, and maybe that this happens a lot with models, especially with Yamaha for some reason. I go back to the FJ1100. It was brought out as a super sport, but the other competition, Cali had beat it up already before it really got into the market, and the FJ very quickly became a sport tourer. So and in 84, 85, it was the FJ1100. It stayed the same, but in 86, or maybe I think it had a hiatus in 86 and it came back in 87. It doesn't matter. It went to 1200 cc's, and all of a sudden the fairing grew for wind protection. So Yamaha realized that they brought out a bike that they may have intended to be a super sport, but the market had moved on, and it was finding a role as a sport tourer. So they embraced it and went with it. And I think the DRZ is the same thing, where they kind of intended it to be a performance, single track monster, and it really wasn't that when it came out, or the market didn't seem to take it that way. So they very quickly followed up with the S and the SM models. And you guys correct me, maybe the S model was the first model. I don't know. And the E was an attempt. But I don't think that's correct. So I think it was always intended to have those close ratio gears, and it was never intended to be a dual sport slash ADV bike, adventure bike. And people have tried to use it that way with varying success. But that's the thing. You'll get people like, the Dork on the road. For example, he'll say, well, I had it on the highway for 75 miles an hour. And, it's not like great, but it's not bad. Like, it's not as bad as everybody says. Here's the thing, right? Every gear has a power band, and that's something else a lot of people don't understand. And the DRZ has a short power band. It's not a big long power band, which is odd because of the torque curve. Probably should lend it to having a bigger power band, but I think it's the gear ratios. And so when you're on the highway, it seems like it's revving higher than you want it to rev. And I think that's why a lot of people say it's no good on the highway. Now, I'm totally discounting weight and wind protection and getting blown around by semis, like all that aside. I'm just talking about engine speed. A lot of people feel like it's it's working harder than it is, but the bike is a high-strung bike. That's where the torque curve and the power band is on that engine. And it has the power there. If you're going, and there's no tack on my bike, so I don't know what the RPM. That's probably leads to this too. If you were, it doesn't matter what noise or feel the bike was. If you saw a tachometer, and the red line is 8,500 RPM, and your bike is revving on the highway in 75, and you're only doing 5,000 RPM, well, yeah, you know, you're like, oh, okay, well, that's fine. But because you can't see the red line on a DRZ, you just feel like the bike's working harder in fifth gear at those higher speeds. But you can tell when you pull out to pass somebody that the bike still has power to do that without downshifting. Unless you're really, really high, like your gearing is really low and you're really winding it out on line up there. And that tells you right there that the bike has got, you're within the power band. So regardless of whether you think the engine's loud or you feel like it's revving higher than it is, and that goes back to torque curve, because the torque comes on so low, you think that you're in the power band, and the torque kind of masks that power band. It makes it feel the power band lower than it really is. And so I think that's why people feel like that sixth gear is so needed so bad. Now some people might have a legitimate gripe because they're really using it as a single track monster and they've got it geared lower, and for woods and the way they like to ride, and it doesn't have the range to do what they want in the woods and ride the highways to get to the trails. There's always going to be a compromise there. But I think if you gear it stock, or maybe gear it, like, I think stock is what, 1542? Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think it's 1540 or 1542 or 15 something like that. You go to 1544 or whatever. I think just slightly gearing, if you're doing a lot of highway, you slightly gear it, like 2 teeth or one, like, you know, I know the 16 tooth up front hits the rubber and you can shave it a little bit, but, you know, 1 tooth in the front equals 3 teeth in the rears. Anyway, something like that. If you gear it slightly more for road use, I don't think you're going to sacrifice too much in the trails. If you're doing a lot of road use, if you're using it for commuting and whatnot, you're still going to be able to go off road. You're still going to be able to do that stuff. You may have to gear down a little more. You may have to do whatever, you know, because that argument's always there. And that brings me to the KLX in gear ratios, because the gear ratios in the KLX are really narrow. They're still narrow. In sixth gear, I find at those higher highway speeds, it's still revving. Well, it's not revving terrible, because it does redline, I think, at 8.5 or something like that. So it still doesn't look like you're revving that, but there's not a lot of power up there. Sixth gear doesn't feel like an overdrive gear. To me, it doesn't feel like it's quite tall enough, but I think they did that because the 300 cc's and the low torque on that engine, more torque than the 250, but still lowish torque compared to the DRZ. You don't have that tap if you crack the throttle or twist it to pass somebody. You do have to gear down and really give it some gears to get by. So I think that's why maybe 6 doesn't feel tall enough to me. But I just can't. I haven't done a long trip on the KLX, and that's kind of when you really start to feel that, is when you're doing I don't mean a long trip, but longer rides on the highway. If it's better than the DRZ, I'm not sure it's better by much. And then the weight comes into factor. The DRZ does have a little extra weight, help keep you planted, where the CRF300 and the KLX300, you know, you're going to get blown around a bit more. Again, it's like Dork on the Road, he said, none of these bikes are great for highway riding, right? You know, put a windscreen on the DR650 and you might be a little bit better. And of course, what I would say to somebody, if you're doing very little off-road, and when I say off-road, wood stuff, but you're doing gravel roads, fire roads, and we have a lot of those here in Nova Scotia, unpaved roads, and you want to be able to take that bike on a highway trip or a longer ride, get the KLR, right? And the new KLR is even better for that. You know, arguably, I think Dork and Road made a good choice with the KLR, even over the Africa Twin. For the reasons he stated, right? I mean, and I think that maybe if he'd started on an older KLR, he might have moved up to the Africa Twin a lot more carefully. I think he nailed that very well. So, fifth gear versus sixth gear. The other benefit of those close ratios in the DRZ is when you're driving in the woods, not when maybe you're picking your way through a single track and over little logs and stuff where you're really idling in first gear. And you're going to find that all the time with problems. Even on the KLX, I don't feel like when I have to go that speed on a really gnarly trail at the KLX, I feel like first gear is a little too low and second gear is a little too high. The gap is still not the best at certain speeds on the KLX either. So I'm not sure anybody's ever going to nail that for anybody, because everybody feels a little differently, you know, on those conditions. But if you're cruising on a four-wheeler trail, like not one that's all rutted out in the woods, but something that's about the size of a dual track, like not quite as wide as a Jeep trail, but something that somebody takes a side by side on or something, and it's fairly got a rocky base, and not a lot of rocks, but a lot of gravel. you can carry a little more speed on those trails. And you come around the bend and you got to give the bike a little crack to get the front wheel up over a hole or a washout. The DRZ is perfect for that, especially at stock S gearing, because I just never feel like I'm in the wrong gear. It's always the gear. It doesn't matter. If I'm not in quite the right gear, it still has enough torque that I can crack and pop that front tire up over. That's something I didn't have with the XT500. Not because it didn't have the torque, because it did, but because of that lag in the throttle response, because it was not a pumper carb and it was a direct slide, round slide, but not having the pump, and that's later why they went to the pumper. It's just is to eliminate that little hesitation right off idle, where the pilot system gives over to the needle jet. The DRZ doesn't have that. Even with its crappy stock carb, everybody says, get Electron or get a whatever, a pumper carb on it, it wakes the bike up. Even with the stock carb, it just feels that I'm never in the wrong gear. And if I am in the wrong gear, it's still got enough torque, it saves my butt. I can still get that front tire up over an obstacle. So that's the benefit of those close ratio gears. And I think that's another reason why I really like the KLX, is because I think it maintained those close ratios in the KLX. And it makes the most of that 300 engine. I think that's maybe why 6 doesn't feel quite tall enough for me. But again, some of that is just it's personal taste. It really is. All right. Yeah. So that's quit harping about the 5th gear. I do keep going for 6. And I'm like, damn it, you got me again. But on a 6-gear bike, sometimes I go whacking for 7. So it just, you don't know. It's all in gear ratios. It's not the number of gears. So I'd really like to try one of those wide ratio transmissions on the DRZ. That would be interesting. There's a couple of reviews on them on the old YouTube, but not as much. I'd like to have some more opinions, but it's an expensive thing to do. Like it's not peanuts, right? And I wouldn't buy a bike with the intention of doing those sorts of mods, right? If something happens to the DRZ engine and I don't want to upgrade to something, like maybe Suzuki hasn't updated the DRZ yet, yeah, I would think about doing those upgrades. Instead of just repairing the engine, I would upgrade the engine, maybe do a big bore and a wide ratio transmission, possibly. But and that brings me back to the KLX and CRF300. Like, I'm a bigger guy. I'm a 230. I'm short, really short legs. I'm like at a 28-inch inseam, which makes the seat height on the DRZ kind of hard, which is why the seat concept's low, and I'll get to that later. And the weight distribution is up high. That is a criticism, but I don't find that the KLX or the CRF is going to be any better. If the CRF300 isn't better than the CRF250, then yeah, no. The CRF250 felt top heavy to me. It felt sketchy AF. I did not like that 250 at all, especially with the soft suspension. Now, somebody lighter than me may not feel that way, but at my bulk, I just feel like I need more than a 250 or 300 to get my fat butt around. So I like that engine in the DRZ. Would I be happy if it was a 450? I don't know. Maybe it would be cool as a 450. I certainly like the DR650. I mean, that engine's a peach. I love it. And maybe the 650 would have been a better choice for me, but I think I'm doing much more deep wood stuff, which is why I went with the DRZ to begin with. But I think the gear ratios, they could have, well, again, back to the power bands. I don't think they made a mistake with that. I think it's fine the way it is, and I think that's why it stayed the way it is this many years. It just feels like the engine. I've harped about that enough. It just, where you feel like the engine should be, it feels higher when you're on those highway speeds. But again, it was never made to be a pounding highway anyway. But people do it. They put little windscreens and some luggage and stuff, and they do trips. So that brings me to another big point about small displacement motorcycles in general. And I know that the torque on the DRZ, especially in the Supermoto, I haven't ridden the Supermoto, but I can just imagine that it brings out the hooligan in you. I know that even the XT500, on your back roads, even with that 21-inch front tire, it's so fun just to hammer those roads and lean it into the curves and stuff with the right tires. And the DRZ is the same way. And so I could see the Supermoto being a lot of fun like that. And so, and that's the thing, a lot of bikes really dictate the way you drive them because of the way you feel when you drive them, and that does play a role in it. And but when you hop on the Van, that's 200 cc's, what I say, 18 horsepower, I can't get that bike to go 90 kilometers an hour on a flat, but any kind of hill, I'm hooped. So I have to plan back roads. If I have to go somewhere, if I want to go somewhere on that bike further than just going downtown to do groceries or something, pop around, I have to stick to back roads. Like even the 100 series highways here, which are 2-lane highway, not the 4-lane freeway, but the 2-lane highway, the speed limits are 100, and that I can't do 100, so I'm doing 90 basically, and as long as I'm not going up a hill on that bike. So getting from one exit to another exit, you can do it. You know, you're holding up traffic a little bit. Somebody may be honking at you, not honking, but ticked off behind you. So you can kind of get from. But I'd love if that was a 250. I really would love the Van to be a 250, just for that reason, just so I could get from exit to exit at maybe 100 kilometers an hour. I don't need to pass anybody. I don't need to do anything, just to keep up with traffic on it. I'm never going to take it on a 4-lane. I never need to go 110. And for people who are miles an hour, I think 100 is around what, 60, 55, 60 miles an hour. And then you know, I just don't ever see. I don't know why somebody wants to go 75 miles an hour on any of these bikes. Like, that's 4-lane, and maybe where you live, you have to do 4 lanes to get to a trail. But here you can stick to 80 kilometer, 90 kilometer, or 100 kilometer an hour roads to get from trail to trail. And yeah, I would just do that. And that comes down to riding mentality, and that's what this whole thing is. So when I go out with the Van, I plan my route, and the bike allows me just to kind of relax. I know it can't do it. It cannot get me past, like 80, it's even working hard. You know, not hard because the engine's still got a little bit of that torque. So I know I'm still in the upper area of the power band, but I'm still in the power band and in fifth gear at 80 kilometers an hour. But you're not doing 85 or 90. You're doing 70, 5 to 80, in your 80 zones on these backcountry roads. And you're happy doing it. You're just happy doing it. And it's unfortunate that people feel like they can't do that on the DRZ, because I think if you could get into that mindset with the DRZ, you'd be so much happier with it. But I do understand that the DRZ kind of brings out the hooligan in you a little bit. But if you could adopt that small displacement mindset when you get on that bike, it would be everything you ever wanted it to be. And I think more people need to kind of go that route. I think if we were all thinking more that way, and I'm not saying, we have to be, grandma and grandpa grunt on the country lane, but I think there'd be a lot less road rage and all that kind of stuff if we kind of thought, more like that. And, a motorcycle is supposed to be, for me anyway, it's supposed to be stress relief. It's supposed to be something I do to enjoy myself. And I like being a hooligan, so I enjoy that DRZ. But because some days I like to do that, and I'm just glad I can do that. And on the Van, I can't. You have to take the mindset that I'm talking about. But I think if you make a conscious effort, you can take that same mindset on the DRZ and enjoy it for what it is. I really do. And I plan on, I'd like at some point in this, hopefully it will happen this summer, but if it doesn't, hopefully in the next couple of summers. But I hope to do a longer distance trip on the DRZ. I've got some rear racks coming from Dirt Racks. He had a sale here over Christmas, and so I would like to strap some luggage on and do a little trip. Maybe even if it's mostly roads. Try to stick to maybe some fire roads, back roads, or wherever. And maybe it won't be any more than this province, around this province, or maybe I'll take it up to New Brunswick to visit family. And I'd like to do the same with the Van. The only problem with the Van is you have to get through the Tantramar Marsh here, which is a section of road that goes between where the border between New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, and there's no back roads. You have to take the highway. So that's the only part that gives me pause there, because it's not a long stretch, but I definitely gonna look like the Dumb and Dumber guys on the little bike people going whizzing by. But it could be done. So because once you get into the New Brunswick across the marsh, then you can get back off the 4-lane and back onto the back roads. And there's lots of back roads all the way up through New Brunswick. I got a sister-in-law that has a Rebel 150, and I didn't know they made that. I didn't even know they made it, but it's not the 250. It's a 150cc bike, 2-cylinder 150. and she drives it all over the place, even though that thing's like, you know, there's lots of people that get around on 125s, like the CBR 125s and stuff. So, you know, it can be done. It's just a mindset. That's all it is. All right. Now the other thing is price, and Dork and Adventure brought this up about price, and is the DRZ too expensive for what it is? I don't know. I don't know how many years it takes to get your cost of R&D back, but I do know metal is metal. So it doesn't matter whether it's a DRZ or it's a T7 10 array or an MT07. It is what it is, and metal is metal, and so you're still going to have those costs, right? And it's a shame they haven't updated some things on the DRZ, but just because they felt like it was a sale. Like my local dealer, he goes, why would they change it? It sells every year. They sell every one of them. So why would they change it? And that's a good point, right? And the thing is could they charge less for it? Well, I don't know. People say that. Well, you know, they've long since got their R&D back out of it. Well, I know, but engine cases still cost the same, whether it's on whatever model of bike you got, right? You know, the T7 costs way more than an MT07, right? But it's basically the same motorcycle, right? So I mean, why is the T7 going to cost more? So I don't know whether it's the difference in the suspension or what. I don't know. You know, ADV bikes are hot, so maybe that's why. Just so because they can charge more. But when the MT07 came out, it was a new bike. The R&D went into that, but it was retailing below $8,000 here in Canada. I think $778 or something like that, or it might have been a little lower. The MT09 wasn't much over $8. If it was over $8 when the first year came out. I know the prices crept up a little bit over the last couple of years, but incredible prices for those bikes. Beautiful bikes, by the way. That engine is a real peach. Both those engines, but they cost what they cost, right? They really do, and I feel like the DRZ suspension is pretty darn good for its age and its design and all that sorts of stuff. Like I really do feel, even for my weight, 230, I feel like it's still pretty darn good stock. I don't feel like I need to change it. Where I have had bikes in the past where I have, like the Van, for example, I would like to stiffen. The rear shock's actually not bad, but the front forks, I would like to keep them from collapsing as much. I'd like a little more preload on them. So maybe a mod. Nobody makes any of that, but that may be a mod where they add some spacers or something in there. But I would like just a little bit more preload on those front forks on that bike. So last things I want to mouth about are my impression of some of the mods that are on the DRZ. And the biggest issue I got with that seat, concept seats, is everybody says that's the cat's meow, and it isn't. Now maybe it's because mine is a low version. The foam is dense, and I've ridden bikes with Corbins on it, and Corbins are really a hard seat. Oop, the shop dog wants in here. Corbins are really a hard seat, but they're comfortable, or supposed to be comfortable. Sky, listen. So, my battery's getting low, so I got to wrap this up. But yeah, I'm not a fan of the seat concept seat yet. So we're gonna see. We'll run it for a full summer this year. But that trip around Cape Breton, I was a hurting unit at the end of it, and it was because of that seat. So we'll see. I might have to do something with that. I don't know whether just adjusting the foam. I like how it narrows at the front. I like the shape of it. It's just something's not quite right. And the guy I bought the bike from didn't like it either. He's the one that put that on there thinking he was going to solve his tailbone issue, and it didn't. It was worse. So I still have the factory seat. So I don't know. This was the upgrade, so it's still using the same seat pan. So it's not like I can just swap seats to try it. I'd have to that or pick up a second seat pan somewhere. But I don't know. We'll do. But the yeah, it's out on that. Steering dampeners. That's another big thing that he's got on that. It's preventing me from putting bars on it unless I modify that steering dampener, which I don't know if I want to do at this point. But the bars haven't been too bad. I'm a fairly short guy, so I don't feel like I have to have bar risers at this point. But we'll just see how that develops too. Yeah. So another, the rest of it's like a bash guard, and I mean that stuff is what it is. So we don't need to talk about all that stuff. But I just wanted to put that out there. I feel like it's a relevant video right now, and I'll wrap this up just by saying that I watched another video, and I'm sorry I can't remember the guy who did it, but he was talking about 2023 being the year that Suzuki does something, and I think he's right. I think he's got it. I think the KLX and the CRF are going to hit. The DRZ has been a sales success always because there's really been nothing close to it. And although the CRF300 and the KLX300 don't quite have some of the stuff, it doesn't have the punch in the engine that the DRZ400 has, it's close enough, and those bikes are cheap enough that it makes the 400 it's never had competition like it's had from those two bikes. It's going to give it over the next couple of years. Emissions are going to catch up on that bike. That's the other thing the FI is a benefit for. And does, like I said, I'm not saying carbs are better by any means. FI does have some benefits there. Emissions are gonna catch that bike, I think. So I think it looks like they've got the same bike coming up from 2022 as 2021, same colors as 2021. But I think in 2023, we're seeing it being discontinued in a few countries, and I think we're going to see that changes. Anyway, hopefully you liked this video. Hopefully it wasn't too long, and hopefully you liked the footage that I got to put in. And so for Jeff at Trail Trash Garage, we'll catch you in the next video. You know we're in Canada because
a boot. Not a boot. Sorry.